In this series, we've been exploring the profile of the Democratic Republic of Congo's accession into the East African community. We want to examine the Democratic Republic of Congo's import and export trade relations with the East African community. The first question we ask ourselves is, how do we characterize the Democratic Republic of Congo's economy relative to trade? Now, the chart in front of us displays the economic complexity of a selection of East African nations: Japan, Switzerland, and South Africa. Japan and Switzerland rank first and second on the Global Economic Complexity Index, while the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan rank 143rd and last, respectively. The Economic Complexity Index is a measure of the knowledge accumulated by a given economic system. This economic system can be as small as a town or city and as large as a region or a country. South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo rankings indicate that all of the world's economic systems, or rather of all the world's economic systems, these two contain the lowest accumulation of knowledge. The Economic Complexity Index has both descriptive and predictive value. One descriptive inference that we can make is that countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan have lower per capita incomes and have less productive capacities than countries with higher economic complexity indexes like Kenya, South Africa, or Switzerland. How does the Congo's economic complexity index relate to international trade? Well, the index of economic complexity is built on the premise that the knowledge accumulated by an economic system finds its expression in the basket of goods and services produced by that system. For the most complete data sets, the observatory economic complexity compares national economic systems and bases the economic complexity index on a country's export composition. Judging from the economic complexity index, it is expected that the Democratic Republic of Congo exports goods of a lower complexity than does Japan. This means that, all things equal, the economic complexity index indicates that the Democratic Republic of Congo's exports are easier to imitate than those of Japan. Now, the chart in front of us illustrates the East African community's annual growth rate in goods and service exports. In the past 5 years, average annual growth in goods and service exports was 0.85%. In that same period, average growth in sub-Saharan Africa, the East African region in goods and services exports was 0.32% and 5.12%. If you include the Democratic Republic of Congo in that measure, then we have a growth rate of 5.24%. In that period, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Burundi led the region with average export growth rates of 15%, 9%, and 10%, respectively. In that period, the Democratic Republic of Congo was a net positive contributor to the region's average growth rate. The East Africa community, if you include the Democratic Republic of Congo, also outperformed the sub-Saharan African region and the world. It must be noted, however, that these growth rates are based on relatively small economic base. The year 2020, the Democratic Republic of Congo's goods and services export growth rate of 7.99% was the only positive export growth rate expansion in the region. All other East African community countries experienced contractions in trade. The Democratic Republic of Congo trade in commodities is greater than that of the other East African community countries. At the time of writing, a comparable data set for oil-rich South Sudan was unavailable. The Democratic Republic of Congo's 2020 expansion in exports was likely driven by the commodities trade. Now, the next chart in front of us illustrates the per capita exports of the region between the years 2016 and 2020. In the year 2020, Kenya exported goods and services valued at $181 for every single Kenyan. In that year, this was the highest per capita export value in the East African region. The Democratic Republic of Congo's per capita goods and services exports were valued at $155, while those of Rwanda were valued at $151.8. In the year 2020, these two nations were the second and third most important per capita exporters. When the range of data is expanded to a 5-year average for the period 2015 to 2020, these countries maintain their place and rank. This suggests that upon its accession, the Democratic Republic of Congo will have a net positive effect on the East African region's average export value. Now, the next chart in front of us tries to answer the question, where in Africa did the Democratic Republic of Congo export to in the year 2019? This gives us an idea of who the Democratic Republic of Congo's export partners are. The chart above illustrates the 2019 export base basket of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In that year, 2019, Democratic Republic of Congo exports to the world were valued at $8.164 billion. In that year, more than 75% of the Democratic Republic of Congo exports were made in copper and metals. An excess of 80% were made in raw materials. In that same year, China was the Democratic Republic of Congo's most important export partner. Valued at $4.5 billion, Democratic Republic of Congo exports to China were more important than the $2.75 billion that nation exported to the African continent. In that year, the Democratic Republic of Congo exports to Africa took a 7.43% share of its exports to the world. Democratic Republic of Congo exports to the East African community were valued at $21 million and took up a 0.257% share of the Democratic Republic of Congo's exports to Africa. In 2019, the Congo made exports to Kenya, Burundi, and Rwanda only. The Republic of Congo's exports, or Congo-Kinshasa exports to Kenya, were valued at $18.4 million. 71% of these exports were made in sawn wood. That is, the pieces of wood exported from the Congo-Kinshasa to Kenya were prepared for use in furniture manufacturing. On the whole, more than 90% of Congo-Kinshasa exports to Kenya were made in raw agricultural materials and agro-processed goods. In 2019, Congo-Kinshasa exports to Burundi were valued at $2.63 million. 50.9% of Congo-Kinshasa exports to Burundi were made in processed animal or plant derivatives, including vegetable fats and oils, and their cleavage products. In that year, the Democratic Republic of Congo also made $78,100 in textile exports to Burundi. On the whole, unprocessed raw materials were not an important feature of Democratic Republic of Congo exports to Burundi. In 2019, Congo-Kinshasa exports to Rwanda were valued at $15.8 million. Notably, 28.2% share of these exports were made in electricity. Agricultural products made up at least 22% of Congo-Kinshasa exports to Rwanda. The goods exported to Rwanda featured minimal processing and were not of an extremely high value. Overall, Congo-Kinshasa exports were made primarily in raw materials, while its imports were made in manufactured and processed goods. The East African Community region seems not to be an important destination for Democratic Republic of Congo exports. This fact remains true when this trade is compared with the African continent. Zambia, Namibia, Egypt, and South Africa were export destinations of greater importance as the East African Community destinations put together. Congo-Kinshasa exports to these EAC countries was not similar in its composition. While Congo-Kinshasa exports to Kenya and Rwanda were nearly matched in value, Congo-Kinshasa exports to Burundi were a less significant $2.63 million. Relative to their respective gross domestic outputs, however, Congo-Kinshasa exports to Rwanda were more important than its exports to Kenya. Finally, Congo-Kinshasa exports to Burundi and Rwanda were more diversified than its exports to Kenya. Although Congo-Kinshasa per capita exports were quite high relative to its East African community counterparts, these exports were made in raw materials. These exports are vulnerable to fluctuations in global commodities prices. In order to increase the complexity of its exports, the region will need to increase its industrial footprint and find a foothold in the global value chain. What about Democratic Republic of Congo's import relations with the East African community? Now, the chart in front of us shows the imports of goods and services growth as a percentage annually between the years 2016 and 2020. Now, nations export that which they can produce and import those goods that they cannot produce but for which they have a demand. Between the period 2016 and 2020, the 5-year average goods and services imports growth rate for the world was 1.01%. Congo-Kinshasa and Rwanda averaged 10% and 7.2% growth, respectively. This was greater than the Sub-Saharan African average of 0.536%. In the year 2019, Congo-Kinshasa's imports of goods and services grew by 25.16%. In 2020, the growth rate was depressed to 12%. Experiencing the most significant drop in export growth rates, Kenya's growth rate in the imports of goods and services shrunk by 8.48%. Now, it is probable that demand and supply shocks related to the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in this drop in the annual growth in imports. Finally, Congo-Kinshasa may owe its large import stock to its relatively immature manufacturing footprint. To enhance the image offered by import share of GDP, we may look to the value of these imports and compare it to the rest of the region. In the year 2019, Kenya imported $388 for each of its citizens. In the year 2020, Kenya's per capita import value was $332. In both 2019 and 2020, Kenya's per capita import value was the largest in the East African community region. In both years, Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo's per capita imports earned them a second and third place ranking, respectively. Furthermore, the Democratic Republic of Congo's imports of goods and services share of GDP of 29.8% was surpassed only by Rwanda. Finally, Congo-Kinshasa's international trade accounts for 58% of its GDP. This was significantly larger than the East African Community regional average of 36.2%. Congo-Kinshasa is reliant on international trade.